Welcome back to the class. In today's tutorial, we are going to see a very interesting topic, something called as the object-oriented programming using Python. So first of all, you might not be aware about what the object-oriented programming is. So this current topic or this today's topic requires you to have some knowledge about what the object-oriented programming is, what the class is, what the object is. Then only you can understand this topic very clearly. But still, I'll try my level best to make you aware about what the class, what the object is using various examples, and we'll try to see them using the code as well. So for example, if I ask you to record the information about the 100 students, then, and yeah, into that, I want their roll numbers, I want their names, I want their gender information, I want their, suppose a residential address information, their weight, height, and the other demographic information of the student. Now, in this case, if you don't have the concept related to something called as object-oriented programming, then you will take each and every student's information and you will manually insert that into any database or anything data recording system that you have. This is a very quite tiring task because you have to perform the same activity or you have to write the same activity again and again. Instead, you can create a class, something called as a student, and you can create the n number of objects of this class such that every object will help you to store the new record. This is basically what we mean by the object-oriented programming, wherein class and object comes out to be the pillars of this discussion. Class is something which is a very generalized kind of entity, and object is nothing but the specialized entity of that class. For example, if I say human beings as a class, then every class has its own attributes as well as some functions. Attributes will be your eyes, your nose, your ears, your hand, your legs. These are nothing but the attributes that are provided to you by God. And what are the functions? So using eyes, I can view, I can see. Using hands, I can write. Using legs, I can walk. So these are nothing but the functions that we implement using the attributes that are provided to us. So whenever you say human, human doesn't have any kind of real-time existence. But when you say human Prachi or human some XYZ person, that time that class, it's getting instantiated, that class gets some kind of meaning. When you are simply called as a human, obviously you're a very generalized kind of entity. But someone when calls you that, okay, you are a human XYZ and you are having the special abilities, then that time you become the object kind of. And that's why in the object-oriented programming, it tries to depict the real world kind of the scenarios. And so it is very common thing that is said with respect to object-oriented programming, that they try to depict the real life, or they try to create the real world scenarios using object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming is not only the concept which is related to the Python, but it's related to the all programming languages, including C++, Java, Python, and the other languages as well. So it's a very common paradigm of the programming, and Python is one of the programming language that uses object-oriented programming. Object-oriented programming can be used in variety of the applications. So there is no particular domain in which it is used or particular domain in which it is not used. Let us simply try to understand what do we mean by class and what do we mean by object. So as you can see here, I have created a class called as a human, and I'm simply writing pass over here. This is a special statement that is available in Python, which says that if you simply want to create a kind of skeleton, but if you're not prepared that what that class should consist of, and if you don't write anything into that, and if you simply create a class, then it is going to generate an error. If you write this pass keyword, then whenever interpreter checks this pass, understands that user has not written any code, or user simply wants to create a kind of a skeleton, he is not prepared with any kind of logic inside that skeleton, and that's why the pass statement is written, so that there won't be any error generated. And if you have written some next statement just below this class human, then those statements will get executed. Otherwise, we know that interpreter have a special way of working, that if there is any error, they do not proceed with the next statement if they find out error in any in-between statements. That's why it is very important to write pass kind of statements everywhere whenever you want to create a structure where you want to simply skip that particular code of block. So in the next code block, I have created this class having a name called as the employee. And here I'm assigning two attributes. One is name and another one is the age. These are called as the attributes of the class, or you can say these are nothing but the variables that are written inside this class. Then this is nothing but the function that we are writing inside the class, which is implementable by this class itself. That means the existence of this function is for this class itself. So what this function is acquiring, this function is acquiring the name as well as age, which are nothing but the attributes of this class employee. So writing self is mandatory over here because info is nothing but the function that is created on this class. That means it is accessing the elements of itself or of the class itself that is declared as an employee. That's the reason it is mandatory to write self. And whenever you want to access the element of a particular class, that time it is generally accessed using self.name, self.age, or if you would have any other entity called as location, then also you have to write self.location in order to access the information of that particular element. Here, when we write like this, emp is equal to employee, open and close bracket, that time you are trying to create object of this class. So by writing this, we have created one object of this class employee, and using this object, you can access all the elements as well as all the functions of that class. So here I have written print emp.name. So emp is nothing but the object created of this employee class. So when you write emp.name, so it can access the value of that particular attribute of that class. So that value is Prachi. And so the name would be printed as my name is, that is basically how you have, no, sorry, this is for the info class. Here you are simply printing the name and age. So it will simply print the name as Prachi and the age as 30. Then on the last line, you are writing emp.info. That means you are accessing to this function info, which is written inside this employee class. Now inside this function, you have written my name is self.name and my age is self.age. So that is going to again read the value of name and age that is mentioned inside the class as my name is Prachi or my age is 30. So basically how this class works over here. Now, with respect to the class, you might have seen this type of method, which is very, very, and very common with respect to Python, written as init, which stands for initialization. And whenever you'll find init method written into any class function, it indicates that you are trying to create something called as a constructor of that class. Constructor is a specific method or a special method of class, which allows you to declare variable of the class in that particular method. So like we have created the variables of the class somewhere over here. So if you want to create a variables, so instead of writing like this, it is always considered to be the better way to create a constructor and then create the variables inside it. So in this case, I'm creating a constructor which is parameterized. That means here we are not going to hard code the values, but we want to take the values at the runtime. So that's the reason self is written. Self is basically written because this is a definition or this is a function of this class. And whenever the function is related to the class, it's mandatory to write self. And these are the two parameters that we are going to declare for this. That means these are the two attributes that belongs to this employee class. Then we are saying that create one method and call that method as introduce. That is nothing but the name given to that method as introduce. Again, self is written over here. It's mandatory because you are trying to say that this is a method that is implemented on this class. So writing self is mandatory. Then you are writing print my name is self.name and self.age. So similar kind of code that we have just seen in the previous case is repeated somewhat over here. You are creating over here as an object called as emp1, which is generated from this employee class. But unlike we have hard-coded the values in the previous case, here we are passing the value to the parameter as Unikaksha and 30. So Unikaksha will take the place of the name attribute and 30 would take the place of the age attribute. And that's why whenever you'll call emp1.introduce, that time it will call this introduce function and will print the self name as Unikaksha and self age as 30. So this is basically how you can create a parameterized constructor wherein you can pass the values and you may write some methods using which you can access the values of that particular class. Now, as I said you before some time that if you are writing the object-oriented programming, the lot of task of repeating the code is saved. So for example, here I'm creating the class employee with one variable called as location, which is fixed at the value of Mumbai. Then I'm creating one constructor method where again, I'm taking the name as well as age at the runtime from the user. Whatever name user will enter will go inside the self.name. Whatever age user will enter will go inside the self.age. Here we are creating the first object of this class employee and we are passing the name as Prachi and suppose say the age as 30. And similarly, we are creating some another object with some different name and different value of age. In this case, whenever you'll print emp1.name, so it can access or it that time passes the value as Prachi and 30 to this particular name and age parameter. So whenever you'll print emp1.name, emp1.location, that is fixed as Mumbai, and emp1.age, that time it is going to print the value as 30. Similarly, if you write emp2 name is, so it will call this second object because you are writing emp2.name. So what is the value passed to the second object that will be printed? Location may it is going to again print the value as Mumbai because that's the default location that you have set. And whenever you will write emp2.age, that time again it will take the value from emp2 object and the age value is 25. So the 25 will be printed on the screen. So this is basically you can create n number of objects from the given class. So that was a simple demonstration of how we can create the multiple objects using the same class. So I just hope in today's session you understood what do we mean by class, what do we mean by object, how we can create a default or how we can pass the default values, how we can create a parameterized constructor, what the constructor is, and basically what's the uses of having object-oriented programming languages. There are a lot of functionalities of the object-oriented programming language that we are going to discuss as well as discover in every session henceforth. Thanks for patiently watching to this session. See you soon with something exciting related to the object-oriented programming. Thank you so much for your attention. Bye-bye.